Just wanted to do a channel update and one quick video because I've had an issue come up recently that I think is at the very least interesting. The issue has to do with the flywheel on a 372 or really any Husqvarna chainsaw. But before I get into that, I just want to say thank you. I'm up to nearly 400 subscribers now. We're nearly 250,000 views on the channel. Thank you so much to everybody that is willing to put up with my screaming kids in the background, even though it's 9 o'clock at night. I've had a lot of fun making these videos. They're very time consuming, so please people bear with me in these videos because I spend a lot of time just simply cutting and pasting. I'm not doing anything fancy with editing. I'm not doing any special effects or anything like that. I just want to make sure that I'm as thorough as possible, and I want to share what I've learned, some of which I figured out on my own, some of which I come by online. And one interesting thing that I've found is that I tend to have that one last little crucial piece of information always tends to be lended to me by the guys on Arborist site. They've been really great. So let's describe the issue. So I had an issue with the saw. I don't have it in my hands right now. It's out in the shed. It's actually for sale on Craigslist. But it's a 372, and I put it together. It was all a mishmash of parts, and it wasn't nearly as nice as this one's going to be. Put it together, and it had compression, and I kitted the carb, and everything was pretty good, and I put it in wood, and it just didn't have pop. So you guys followed the 394 issue that I had, so I said, well, maybe it's something in the impulse line. Wasn't anything in the impulse line. That was completely free and clear. So what else could it be? It could be a timing issue. I had an aftermarket flywheel on it that I remembered fiddling with the timing a bit. So maybe, just maybe, the timing was off. Let's look at some flywheels and look at the issues. Let's look at a perfectly good OEM flywheel. So this is an OEM flywheel, and in here is the key. There's a key, and there's a keyway here on the crank. Right here. So this is one of the things that Husqvarna does that really drives me nuts. Absolutely drives me berserk, because all the other small engines I've seen, everything on the planet ends up with what's called a key that is separate. Husqvarna actually built theirs into, they actually cast it into the flywheel. So what happens if it shears? You throw the flywheel away. Come on, that's silly, of course. Perfectly good flywheel. These things should last for a long time unless a tree drops on them and you break fins off. There's really nothing to go wrong in a flywheel. There are no moving parts with the exception of these things, but those are easily replaceable. So there's nothing really that should go wrong with a flywheel. There's no real reason to throw it out, ever. Unless this happens. This one has a key that's sheared. There's no key in there. Can you see that? Maybe you can see that. So that's actually sheared off. So in the past, what I've done, I actually take the Dremel tool, grind a slot in there, and then I use a piece of copper wire, Romex, in there. Now, all the key really is a positioner anyway. It just helps you line up. You can see I've drawn a line on here. I know where the timing is. Pretty close. It doesn't have to be super perfect, but pretty close. So I know where the timing is. So once I know that, you're good. The problem is, on the aftermarket cylinder I used, you'll notice something interesting. They have a keyway. This is actually the proper way to do it. The really dumb thing is that this is a Chinese knockoff. So there were a number of things that were said online about what actually happened with the saw. I mentioned that I had an aftermarket flywheel. And somebody said the magnets weren't as strong, and that's why I wasn't getting as good of a spark. Well, let's have a look. The magnets are actually bigger on the aftermarket flywheel. Physically bigger. And I actually lined these up and tried to figure out what the timing was on these. And as it turns out, I think the aftermarket flywheel is indeed keyed in the same exact spot as the OEM one is. So, unless you're using really weak magnets, which is probably not the case, I don't think so. So, unless you're using really weak magnets, or unless the timing's off, why else would you not want to use an aftermarket flywheel? I think it's fine. So, now we get to the next issue, the timing issue. They have a keyway, it's a keyway, ground in here, which is the proper way to do it. The only problem is, I bought this as part of a parts lot. No key. I said, I've done this before. Romex, no problem. So you get a little piece of copper wire. I'm going to go do that right now. Keep in mind that all this piece of copper wire is a positioner. That's all that it does. Unless something catastrophic happens, in which case the copper will shear before the aluminum or the steel crank anyway, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. If you got a problem, you want a piece of metal that will indeed shear. So I just bend this over. I have done this a number of times. So you get a little bit of a, you bend it over, you get a little bit of a detent. I don't know if you can see that. Not a detent, but a bump here. So the bump will actually go into the crank key there. So once it's in there, you can notice that there's a little bit of play. So the next thing that helps to get this right, by the way, I used 14 gauge. This is 12 gauge Romex. I used 14 gauge on the other one, and there was even more play. You do not even want to, on a modified saw, you do not want to advance the timing on these. At least that's what I've heard from the guys online. So I figured, I don't want the timing retarded, so I wanted to advance as much as possible. So I just made it advanced, torqued the nut down, and that was that. But I had it so far advanced that I was having trouble with power. What to do now? So I've got this little bit of play here. So how do I know exactly where I'm at, where the middle is? Actually, I think in here you can kind of feel where the middle might be. Then all you do, you take this and nip this right off. You can do it on the saw or off the saw, it doesn't matter. You can nip this right off. Another thing we want to do, though, another thing that helps me anyway, is you need to know where you are at as far as this keyway goes. And the easiest way to do that is with a Dremel tool. So what I will do is take and eyeball it, and it's all it is an eyeball here. So I can actually see so now I can see the orientation of the timing. And the marks that I have ground in there, I can now simply line up. So let's say I was using one with a sheared key. I'd grind in the keyway, I'd have this marked, and then all I have to do is line that up. Again, just by eye, good enough. Cinch this on down. Now you got it. So here's what I would do if I was putting this one down. If I was going to use an aftermarket flywheel on this, which I at this point don't think is a problem. There might be plenty of aftermarket parts that are no good, but at this point I can't see why a flywheel would be among them. Okay, so the key is down in there. So that's right on as far as I can see. I would then put the washer down. There's a washer that's special that goes on this, and then a nut. This gets ideally tapped on, so it binds a little bit better immediately. But you put the nut on with blue Loctite and with a torque wrench. There are specific torque settings on this, so you have to check the model of saw. Ideally, you need a piston stop in there if you're working with the piston and the cylinder on there. Piston stop is good, and then with a torque wrench, that nut goes down, and then after that happens, you can actually check if you have this drawn. If you have the line drawn, after the nut's down, you can still check and make sure that timing didn't slip. So let's recap. If you have a sheared flywheel key, or if you have an aftermarket flywheel with a keyway, it is possible to use a piece of 14 or 12 gauge Romex as a key between the two, and I have used it on a number of saws and it works just fine as long as you have the nut torqued to proper spec. So what was happening when it was too far advanced? What were the symptoms? The symptoms that I had were there was no power in the cut. I'd get it into the cut and it felt like there was extra friction in there. It felt like the chain brake was almost on, it was almost engaged, and it just didn't want to go. It felt like there was extra friction in the piston of the cylinder. Something was binding, it almost is kind of how it felt. It revved, it got to full RPM, just took a little while to get there, and there was this kind of poppy sound, probably a misfire, not necessarily backfire, but a misfire of some kind. Even just when I first started it up, it was poppy, like it was a little bit too aggressive, almost like the sound when you have a car that has racing cams in it and it just wants to pop a little bit extra, like it's running a little rough. So that's what happens when it's too far advanced. I can't comment personally on how it feels if the timing is too far retarded, so I'll let other people do that. But I can say, at least this is a 372 XP, so I can say that keeping the timing stock is important. That wraps that up for this video. Thank you so very much for paying attention to me. And I hope that as we go forward with this channel and with these videos that I can help a few people know what I know. And that isn't much, and at this point I'm still learning, and I'm learning a lot day by day. So I really appreciate everybody going on this adventure with me. Feel free to drop me a comment, Happy DIYing, and don't forget to subscribe.